The sun rose gently over the hills of Idanra, painting the ancient Baobab gold. Beneath its shade sat Baba Tolu, the greatest hunter the village had ever known, sharpening his Dane gun. His wife, Aya Tolu, pounded yam in the courtyard while their only child, 12-year-old Omotara, sang softly as she fetched water. Everyone said Omotara carried the beauty of the moon and the laughter of a river. No one noticed how Baba Tolu's eyes sometimes lingered too long on his daughter when she danced during the New Yam festival. The elders sat under the baobab sharing kola, speaking of coming rains and good harvests, never seeing the shadow growing inside one of their own. That morning, Omotara greeted her father with a bright "Ikaero, Baba," and he answered with a smile that did not reach his eyes. The village woke happy, unaware that the gods had already turned their faces away. Moonlight slipped through the cracks of the mud wall into Omotara's small room. She slept the deep sleep of children until she felt a heavy hand on her mouth. "Baba," she whispered in terror when the hand moved away. He told her to keep quiet, that this was their secret, that he loved her more than anyone ever could. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but fear glued her voice to her throat. Night after night, the visits continued like a nightmare she could not wake from. Aya Tolu slept in the next room, exhausted from the day's work, hearing nothing over the loud cricket songs. By the third month, Omotara stopped singing. Omotara began vomiting behind the house every dawn. Aya Tolu thought it was bad water and brewed bitter herbs for her daughter. The girl grew quiet, her once bright eyes now like still ponds hiding crocodiles underneath. She no longer ran to greet her father when he returned from hunting. At night, she pressed her small hands against her belly, feeling something growing that should never have been there. She wanted to tell her mother, but each time she opened her mouth, her father's warning hissed in her ear, "If you speak, I will kill your mother and say you lied." So Omotara carried the poison alone. During the evening meal, Baba Tolu noticed the slight roundness beneath Omotara's wrapper. His face turned the color of ash. That night he dragged her to the backyard and beat the truth out of her with questions instead of fists. She cried silently, nodding when he asked if anyone else had touched her. He knew the child was his. The realization hit him like the butt of his own gun. For the first time in his life, the great hunter felt fear, raw, shaking fear that crawled under his skin. He decided the thing inside her must die before the village found out. Early, before the cock crowed, Baba Tolu slipped out of Idanra to the forbidden forest where Baba Lagbaha, the dark herbalist, lived. He carried 2 fat goats and a calabash of palm wine as payment. In the herbalist's hut that smelled of blood and roots, he poured out his shame in a whisper. Baba Lagbaja's eyes glowed like coals. He laughed low and said, "Even the gods cannot wash this kind of sin clean, but I can remove the evidence." He gave Baba Tolu a black potion wrapped in banana leaves and warned, "If she drinks all, both mother and child will follow the night." Baba Tolu paid and left without looking back. The moon had hidden itself behind thick clouds, as if Olorin himself could not bear to watch. Inside the mud house, the palm oil lamp flickered weakly, throwing long shadows that danced like wicked spirits on the walls. Omotara lay on her sleeping mat, her small body curled tight beneath a thin Ankara wrapper, pretending to sleep. She had learned to slow her breathing whenever she heard her father's footsteps creaking across the courtyard after her mother's snores began. Tonight those footsteps were heavier, hurried, like the heartbeat of a man running from something that already lived inside him. Baba Tolu pushed the woven door curtain aside and stepped in carrying a small black clay pot sealed with banana leaf. The air immediately filled with a sour, metallic smell that made Omotara's stomach turn even before she saw it. She sat up slowly, clutching her wrapper to her chest, her eyes wide like a trapped antelope. "Baba, I am not sick tonight," she whispered, voice trembling. "Please let me sleep." He did not answer. He only knelt beside her, the lamp's orange light carving deep hollows beneath his cheekbones, making him look like a mask worn by something that was no longer human. "Open your mouth, Omotara," he said, his voice low and cracked, the same voice that once sang her to sleep when thunder frightened her as a baby. She shook her head, tears already falling. He grabbed her jaw with fingers that smelled of gunpowder and fear, forcing her lips apart. She fought, small fists beating against his chest, legs kicking, but she was only 12 reigns old, and he was the strongest hunter in Idanra. The more she struggled, the harder his grip became, until she felt her jawbone scream in protest. He tore the banana leaf from the pot with his teeth and tilted it toward her mouth. The liquid was thick, black as midnight, and bitter as death. The first drops touched her tongue, and her whole body jerked as though lightning had entered her. "Baba, please," she managed to cry between forced gulps. "It burns. It burns inside." Sobs tore out of her throat, raw and animal. Some of the potion spilled down her chin, staining the wrapper dark, eating tiny holes through the cotton where it landed. She clawed at his wrists, nails drawing blood, but he did not feel pain anymore. Only panic that this evidence of his evil must disappear before the next moon. When the pot was empty, he released her. Omotara fell back onto the mat gasping, clutching her belly as fire spread through her insides like 1,000 red ants. Her legs drew up to her chest, and she rocked, rocking, moaning the way her mother moaned when labor pains came. "Mummy, mummy," she whimpered, but Ayatollah was deep in the other room, drugged by exhaustion and the sleeping herbs she took for her aching back. Baba Tolu stood over his daughter, chest heaving, watching the potion do its cruel work. A part of him, small and buried, wanted to scoop her up and run to the dibia for healing. That part died quickly. He turned away, whispering to himself, "It is better this way. No one will ever know." Minutes stretched into small eternities. Omotara's cries grew weaker as blood began to seep between her thighs, warm and dark, soaking the mat beneath her. She reached one trembling hand toward her father's retreating back. "Baba, why do you hate me?" The question hung in the air like smoke. He paused at the door curtain, shoulders shaking, but he did not turn around. The lamp finally gave up and died, plunging the room into total darkness, broken only by the wet, dying sounds of a child losing everything her father had forced into her. Outside, the hidden moon stayed silent, and the great Baobab on the hill swayed though there was no wind, as if the ancestors themselves were weeping in advance for what was coming. The darkness in the room was not ordinary darkness. It was thick, almost liquid, pressing down on Omotara like the weight of 1,000 stones. She lay on her side on the blood-soaked mat, knees drawn to her chest, arms wrapped tightly around her belly, as if she could still protect the tiny life that was being torn from her. No sound came from her throat now. The first screams had ripped it raw, and all that remained was a terrible silent opening and closing of her mouth like a fish pulled from the river and left to die on the bank. Inside her body, the black potion raged. It felt as though someone had poured hot coals into her womb and then stirred them with a burning stick. Wave after wave of agony crashed over her, each one stronger than the last. Her small toes curled until the nails turned white. Her fingers clawed at the mat until they bled. Blood, thick and dark, kept flowing between her legs in slow, heavy pulses, carrying with it pieces of what should have been her future. She felt every piece leave her, and with each one a part of her spirit followed. In the flickering moments when the pain eased just enough for thought, memories came uninvited. She remembered the day Baba Tolu carried her on his shoulders to the stream, laughing as she tried to catch dragonflies. She remembered him teaching her to whistle with an acacia leaf, praising her when she got it right on the first try. She remembered falling asleep against his chest during moonlight tales, feeling safe because the strongest man in Idanra was holding her. How could that same chest now rise and fall in the next room, calm as though nothing was happening? The betrayal hurt worse than the poison. A new cramp seized her, so violent that her back arched off the mat like a bow drawn for war. This time a sound did escape, not a scream, but a thin, broken animal keen that would haunt every dog in the compound for years. Her eyes rolled white. She bit her tongue to keep from calling for her mother again. She already knew no help would come. Instead, she began to speak to the child inside her, the only being who had ever been more helpless than she was now. In a whisper cracked with blood, she said, "I am sorry, little one. I wanted to sing you lullabies. I wanted to tie gelly on your head when you grew tall. Forgive me. Forgive me." Time lost all meaning. Minutes became days. Hours became lifetimes. At one point, she crawled on hands and knees toward the door, leaving a trail of blood and tears across the mud floor, desperate to reach the courtyard where someone, anyone, might see her. But her strength failed halfway. She collapsed with her cheek pressed to the cool ground, tasting earth and her own salt. The lamp had long gone out, but in the blackness she saw colors. Bright, impossible reds and golds dancing behind her eyes, the colors of the spirit world calling her name. Somewhere far away she heard her mother turn over in sleep and murmur something about tomorrow's market. The everyday sound of that voice, so close and yet unreachable, broke the last piece of Omotara's heart. She pressed both hands over her mouth to hold in the sob that would have torn her in two. Blood seeped between her fingers. And in that moment, curled on the cold floor like a discarded seed, the 12-year-old girl understood that some pains are too big for a body to carry, and that the ancestors were already opening their arms. She closed her eyes and waited for the next wave, no longer fighting it. In the silence between heartbeats, she whispered one last thing, so softly that even the walls could barely hear. If I must die, let me become a breeze that blows gently over other little girls, so no one ever does this to them again. Then the fire rose once more, higher than before, and carried her voice away with it. The night was so deep that even the crickets had fallen quiet. Ayatollah slept the heavy sleep of a woman who rose before the cock, who pounded yam until her shoulders screamed, who carried firewood on her head and sorrow in her heart, without knowing its true name yet. In her dream, she was back at her own mother's compound, a young bride again, laughing as Baba Tolu courted her with roasted bush rat and sweet words. Then the laughter turned into a thin, wounded sound, like a goat kid being slaughtered too slowly. She jerked awake, heart pounding before her eyes even opened. The sound came again, not a cry, not a scream, but something worse, a wet, choking whimper that belonged to no animal she knew. It was coming from Omotara's room. Ayatollah's feet hit the mud floor before her mind caught up. She did not light a lamp. Mothers do not need light to find their children in the dark. She pushed through the door curtain, and the smell hit her first. Iron, sour herbs, and something darker, like meat left too long in the sun. The room was blacker than the inside of a cooking pot, but her hands found her daughter instantly. Omotara was half on the floor, half on the mat, body twisted like a cloth wrung out after washing. When Ayatollah's fingers touched her child's cheek, they came away hot and sticky with blood. Omotara, Imi Omomi. The scream that left Ayatollah's throat was not human. It tore through the compound, scattering night birds from the roof. She fell to her knees and gathered the small, shaking body against her chest. Omotara's wrapper was soaked through. Blood had pooled beneath her like palm oil spilled at a naming ceremony. The girl's eyes fluttered open, glassy and unfocused, trying to find her mother's face. "Mummy, it hurts. Baba gave me." The words dissolved into a cough that brought more blood bubbling to her lips. Ayatollah rocked her the way she had rocked her the night she was born, the night the midwife said, "This one will bring light to your old age." She pressed her mouth to Omotara's forehead and tasted death already cooling the skin. She screamed again, this time for her husband. "Tolu, Tolu, come on. Your daughter is dying." Her voice cracked open the night like thunder. Doors began to open in neighboring compounds. Lanterns flickered to life. But inside the room, time slowed to the rhythm of a mother trying to pour her own life into a child slipping away. Ayatollah's hands flew over Omotara's body, searching for the wound, the snake bite, the evil spirit, anything that could be fought. When her palm slid between her daughter's thighs and came out thick with blood and clots, something inside her chest snapped like dry firewood. She understood then, in one terrible heartbeat, that the wound was not outside. It was inside, deliberate, and the person who put it there was sleeping 10 steps away. She lifted her head and looked through the open doorway toward the main room, where Baba Tolu now stood in his wrapper, lamp in hand, face carved from stone. Their eyes met across the darkness. In that moment, mother and father both knew the truth, and the air between them turned to poison. "God of my fathers will judge you tonight," Ayatollah whispered, so low only the ancestors heard. Then she bent over her dying child again, cradling her, singing the lullaby she had sung every night since Omotara was born. But tomorrow would never come for Omotara. And the lullaby turned into a morning song long before the cock crew. The sky turned the color of a bruised yam as the first cock crowed. Ayatollah had not moved from the floor. She sat with Omotara's head in her lap, the girl's blood drying black on her wrapper. Neighbors crowded the doorway. Auntie Bose, Mama Abeji, old Pa Alabi, faces gray with horror. Someone had fetched the village women's leader, Mama Aramide, who took one look at the child and began to keen, a high wailing that made the dogs howl. Ayatolu's voice cut through the noise like a cutlass. Carry her to the healer. Now, 4 strong women lifted Omotara onto a mat and ran toward Mama Dupe's compound, the most powerful dibia in Idanra. Blood dripped from the mat in a steady trail, marking the path like red palm oil poured for the gods. Baba Tolu stood in the courtyard pretending to pray, hands raised to the sky, but his eyes kept darting to the blood trail as if it might rise up and accuse him. When Mama Aramide spat at his feet and said, "A man who cannot explain his child's blood will explain it to the ancestors," he only bowed lower, hiding the tremor in his knees. Behind him, the great Baobab on the hill seemed to lean forward, listening. A single drop of thick red sap fell from its trunk and splattered on the earth. No one noticed yet. By the time they reached Mama Dupe's hut, Omotara's lips were the color of ash. Mama Dupe was 80 reigns old, skin like burnt leather, eyes sharp as eagle talons. She made the women lay Omotara on the healing mat and sent everyone outside except Ayatolu. The old woman's hands moved over the girl's belly with the speed of a snake's tongue, pressing, listening, smelling the air. When she lifted the blood-soaked cloth and saw what had been done, Mama Dupe staggered back as though struck by lightning. She fell to her knees and began to speak in the tongue of spirits, words that made the calabashes rattle on their shelves. Ayatolu heard only one sentence clearly. "This child carries her father's seed, and he has murdered it with poison." The Dibia looked at Ayatolu with eyes suddenly ancient and wet. "The womb is torn. The poison has eaten too deep. Even if the gods themselves came down, they could not mend this." She placed a withered hand on Omotara's forehead and whispered, "Little moon, go gently." Outside, the crowd heard the Dibia begin the death song. Women tore their wrappers and poured dust on their heads. Men stood frozen, fists clenched, staring toward Baba Tolu's compound as though they could already see the rope waiting for his neck. Ayatolu did not scream. She simply gathered her daughter against her breast again and began walking home, refusing the mat, carrying Omotara in her arms like a newborn. Blood soaked through both their clothes until mother and child looked dressed in the same red funeral cloth. First night, the women boiled every healing leaf known to Yoruba earth: bitter leaf, scent leaf, dogoyaro, uaran. They forced the broth between Omotara's teeth while Ayatolu held her head. The girl vomited black water that smelled of graves. Second night, fever came like fire. Omotara thrashed and called for her father in delirium. "Baba, don't give me the black medicine again." Words that made the women freeze and look at one another with widening eyes. Ayatolu only pressed cool cloths to her daughter's forehead and sang until her own throat bled. Third night, the bleeding slowed and hope flickered. Mama Dupe came herself and poured libation at the doorstep, begging Yamoja to have mercy. For a few hours Omotara opened her eyes and whispered, "Mummy, am I going to school next term?" Ayatolu lied with a smile that cracked her face. "Yes, my queen, you will top your class." Fourth night, the ancestors withdrew their hands. Omotara's breathing turned shallow as a butterfly's wing. Every woman in Idanra kept vigil outside the compound, palm oil lamps burning in a circle of light. Children were sent away so they would not see death claim one of their own. Throughout the 4 nights, Baba Tolu was nowhere. He had gone to pray at the shrine, he said. In truth, he sat alone in the forest, gun across his lap, listening to the drums carrying news of his daughters dying across the hills. It was the hour just before dawn on the 5th day when the compound fell silent. The women inside the room heard Ayatolu's voice change from song to a single, broken note. They rushed in to find her rocking Omotara, calling her name over and over as though volume alone could pull the spirit back into the body. Omotara's chest gave one last small rise, like a bird settling on a branch, then did not rise again. Her eyes stayed open, fixed on her mother's face, pupils wide and black as the bottom of a well. A thin line of blood trickled from the corner of her mouth, bright against skin gone gray. Ayatolu closed those eyes with trembling fingers, kissed each lid, then the forehead, then the lips that would never again call her mummy. She laid her daughter gently on the mat, arranged the small limbs straight, and tied a fresh white cloth around the girl's head the way brides wear geli. Only then did she stand. She walked out into the courtyard where the first pale light was touching the sky. Every eye turned to her. Without raising her voice, she said, "My daughter is gone. The man who killed her still breathes." In that moment, the great Baobab on the hill split open with a sound like 1,000 thunderclaps. Thick red sap poured from the wound and ran down the trunk in rivers. The people of Idanra fell to their knees. They knew the tree had begun to weep blood, and that judgment had already started walking toward Baba Tolu on silent, unstoppable feet. The room was heavy with the smell of palm oil lamps burning low and the sweeter, coppery scent of fresh death. Omotara lay on the mat like a small broken doll, white cloth already tied around her head, her face calm at last, as though sleep had finally granted her the peace her father had stolen. The women sat in a circle around the body, their mourning cloths tied tight, their eyes swollen from tears that refused to stop falling. Aya Tolu knelt at her daughter's head, one hand resting on the cool forehead, waiting for the spirit to linger a little longer before the final journey. Outside, the compound was filling with people. Dawn had not fully broken, yet the whole village pressed against the mud walls, whispering, waiting for the mother to give permission to begin the death wail. Inside, the silence was so complete that every breath sounded like a drum. No one dared move. No one dared speak. They were waiting for Aya Tolu to release her child with the first cry. Then Omotara moved. It was the tiniest motion, just the flutter of her blood-stained lips, so slight that at first the women thought it was the lamp flame tricking their eyes. But Aya Tolu saw. She bent low until her ear almost touched her daughter's mouth, and the girl who had been silent for hours drew one impossible, painful breath. The words came out cracked and wet, barely louder than the sound of a leaf falling on dry ground. "Mummy, it was Baba. He put it inside me. Many nights, he said if I told, he would kill you. He gave me black medicine, so the baby would die. I tried to be quiet. I tried to be good. I'm sorry I couldn't keep the secret. I'm sorry." Each word cost her a piece of the little life that remained. Blood bubbled at the corner of her mouth again, bright and fresh, as though her body were crying the tears her eyes no longer could. When the last word left her lips, her chest fell and did not rise again. This time there was no mistake. The ancestors had allowed her to speak the truth before taking her home. For 3 heartbeats the room was perfectly still. Then Aya Tolu's scream came. It was not loud at first. It started deep in her belly, a low animal sound that grew and grew until it burst out of her throat like a spear thrown at the sky. The scream carried every pain a mother can feel. The pain of labor reversed, the pain of milk that would never be suckled, the pain of a knife twisted in the exact place where love used to live. The mud walls shook. The lamps jumped and went out. Women fell backwards as though the sound itself had struck them. Aya Tolu stood. Her wrapper was soaked crimson from waist to ankle. It looked as if she had waded through a river of blood. She raised both hands to the heavens, palms open and shaking, and began to speak in a voice that no longer sounded human. "Tolu, husband of my youth, father of my shame, you lay with your own blood. You planted death in the womb that came from my womb. You poisoned the child you carried on your shoulders. Listen to me now, you walking corpse. The gods have heard. The earth has heard. Even the stones under your feet have heard. From this day, may sleep run from your eyes. May food turn to poison in your mouth. May every child you see remind you of the one you murdered. I curse you with my bleeding womb. I curse you with my empty breasts. I curse you by the name I gave our daughter, Omotara, the beloved of the gods, who now stands before Olorin and points at you." Each curse struck the air like a blacksmith's hammer on hot iron. Sparks seemed to fly from her words. The women around her began to weep again, but this time it was weeping mixed with terror because they had never heard a mother's tongue become a sword before. Outside, the crowd heard every word. The whisper traveled from mouth to mouth, faster than fire in dry grass. By the time Aya Tolu stepped out of the room, carrying her daughter's body wrapped in the blood-stained mat, the entire village already knew. Men who had hunted beside Baba Tolu for 20 seasons turned their faces away. Women spat on the ground where his shadow would fall. Aya Tolu laid Omotara gently in the center of the courtyard, right under the open sky, so the ancestors could see clearly what had been done. Then she looked up at the hills where the great Baobab stood bleeding, and she spoke once more, softly this time, so only the spirits and the dead child could hear. My daughter, you did not die silent. You spoke. And because you spoke, no little girl in Idanra will ever be silent again. A sudden wind rose from nowhere. It lifted the white cloth from Omotara's face for a moment, and everyone saw that she was smiling, small, peaceful, terrible, as though she had heard her mother's promise and believed it. The sun finally broke over the hills, and its first ray touched the red sap running down the Baobab. The tree groaned like a living thing in pain, and the whole village understood. The judgment had only just begun. Ayatollah carried Omotara's body back into the room and laid her on the sleeping mat that still held the shape of her small frame. She closed the door curtain with deliberate calm, shutting out the village, shutting out the sky. Then she sat beside her child and began to wash her. With a calabash of cold water and a soft cloth, she cleaned every trace of blood from the girl's skin, singing the bathing song she had sung when Omotara was a newborn. Omio, Omio, Omitio, Imo Omomi. The water turned red, then pink, then clear again, but the song never faltered. When she finished, she dressed her daughter in the lace outfit bought for the last Christmas, the one Omotara had begged to wear when I am big enough. It swallowed her now. 3 times neighbors tried to enter to begin the morning rites. 3 times Ayatollah's voice, quiet and terrible, sent them away. Leave me with my child. The ancestors are not finished speaking to us. No one dared cross that threshold again. Outside, Baba Tolu had returned. He stood in the courtyard pretending to weep, beating his chest for the crowd to see. But every time he tried to step toward the room where his wife and dead daughter were, his feet refused to move, as though the ground itself held him back. At midday the sun burned white, yet the compound stayed cold. The shadow of the house stretched long and black, like a grave already dug. As the sun bled into the hills, Ayatollah finally came out carrying Omotara in her arms, wrapped in white, the lace peeping out like a bride's veil. The entire village had gathered in silence. She walked straight to where Baba Tolu stood among the elders and laid the body at his feet. Look at her, she said. Her voice was steady, almost gentle. Look at what you made. Baba Tolu fell to his knees. Tears ran down his face, real tears this time, because even monsters can weep when the mirror is held too close. It was the devil, he cried. The devil entered me. I am not myself. Forgive me, Ayatollah, forgive your husband. The elders shifted, uncomfortable. Some still wanted to believe the great hunter could not have fallen so far. Mama Aramide spat on the ground. The devil does not force a man's manhood into his own child night after night. You invited the devil, Tolu. You fed him palm wine and killed a goat for him. Ayatollah bent and lifted Omotara's cold hand, placing it against her father's cheek. The hand was limp, the fingers already stiff. Feel how cold she is, she whispered. That is the cold that will live in your bones until you die. Baba Tolu jerked away as though burned. He opened his mouth to speak again, but no sound came. For the first time in his life, the hunter was speechless. They dragged Baba Tolu to the sacred Baobab at twilight. The red sap still oozed from the fresh split in the trunk, thick and shining like fresh blood in the dying light. The elders formed a circle. Children were sent far away. Even the dogs were chased off. The chief priest, Baba Ifa, threw 16 kola nuts on the mat. They fell in the pattern of Ogun, god of iron and justice. He did not speak for a long time. Then he looked at Baba Tolu and said, The oracle has spoken. Confess everything, or we will tie you to this tree tonight, and let the sap drink you the way you made your daughter drink poison. Baba Tolu looked at the faces around him, men he had hunted with, drunk with, danced with at funerals and weddings, and saw only strangers wearing masks of disgust. He tried once more. I swear by Oloran, I never touched her. A sudden crack split the air. A huge branch of the Baobab tore loose and crashed to the ground inches from his feet, showering him with red sap that burned where it touched skin. The crowd gasped and stepped back. Baba Ifa spoke again, quieter now. Lie again, and the next branch takes your head. Baba Tolu fell face down in the dirt and began to confess, every filthy detail spilling out like pus from a wound long hidden. With each word the Baobab bled harder, until the ground around it was a pool of red. While the men judged the father, the women took the child. They carried Omotara's body to the river at moonrise, singing the songs only women know, the ones that send a girl child safely to the ancestors. Aya Tolu walked at the head of the procession, carrying a lantern that never flickered though the night wind howled. At the riverbank, they bathed her again in moonlight and river water, rubbing her skin with camwood until she glowed red gold. They braided her hair with white cowries and tied 16 strands, one for each year she should have lived. They dressed her in the osso oak meant for her initiation into womanhood, the cloth that would now wrap her forever. When the rites were finished, Aya Tolu knelt and kissed her daughter's mouth one last time. "Go, my moon," she whispered. "Go and wait for me where no man can ever hurt you again." They laid her on a canoe woven of palm fronds and pushed it into the current. The river carried her gently, steadily, until the little boat of leaves disappeared around the bend, taking the last light of Aya Tolu's life with it. Back in the empty house, Aya Tolu sat on the mat where Omotara had died. She rocked back and forth holding the blood-stained lace dress against her chest. At midnight, she began to speak to the empty room as though her daughter still lay there. "Omotara, wake up. It is time for evening prayer. Omotara, come and eat your EBA before it gets cold. Omotara, don't let mosquito bite you. Come and sleep beside Mummy." Each time she spoke, she waited for an answer that never came. Then she would remember, and the scream that followed rattled the clay pots on the shelf. Neighbors heard and wept behind their doors, but no one entered. Grief this raw could burn anyone who touched it. In the morning, they found her walking naked through the village carrying the lace dress, singing the lullaby at the top of her voice. Children ran after her until their mothers dragged them away in terror. The council of elders met for 3 days. Some wanted him handed to the police in the city. Others wanted him stoned at the market square. The women wanted worse. In the end, Baba Ifa spoke the judgment beneath the bleeding Baobab. "He will not die by human hand. The ancestors have claimed him. Tie him to the tree at nightfall. Let the gods finish what they started." They stripped him of his hunter's charms, broke his Dane gun across a man's knee, shaved his head with a broken bottle. Then they dragged him, naked and bleeding, up the hill. The red sap hissed where it touched his skin, raising blisters that burst and bled. When they tied him to the trunk with new palm rope, he begged, first the elders, then the women, then the children who had once called him Baba Hunter. No one answered. The rope was knotted 16 times, one for every year Omotara would never see. As the sun set, the Baobab's wound closed slightly, as though satisfied payment had begun. Night fell black and starless. Baba Tolu hung against the trunk, arms stretched wide, feet barely touching the ground. The sap kept flowing, slow and deliberate, running into his eyes, his mouth, his wounds. It tasted of rust and bitter herbs, exactly like the potion he had forced down his daughter's throat. He screamed until his voice gave out. No one came. The village had turned its back. Even the night insects avoided the hill. Then the voices began. First it was Omotara's small voice, clear as a bell. "Baba, it burns." Then Aya Tolu's curse, repeated over and over until it became the wind. Then voices he did not recognize, children yet unborn, calling him father, uncle, destroyer. At some point he looked down and saw tiny handprints appearing in the sap on his chest, Omotara's handprints, pressing, as though trying to push his heart out through his ribs. He felt the exact moment something inside him cracked, not bone, but the last piece of the man he used to be. When dawn came, Baba Tolu was still alive, but his eyes were empty. The Baobab had only just begun to drink. And far below in the village, Aya Tolu walked the streets singing, barefoot, smiling at nothing, while mothers hid their daughters behind locked doors and whispered to them for the first time. "If any man ever touches you where he should not, scream. Scream until the sky falls. We will hear you now." They could not bury Omotara in the ground. The earth itself refused her. When the men carried the palm frond canoe back from the river the next morning, it was still floating in the shallows, unmoved by the current, as though the river had spat her out. The women lifted her body and carried it up the hill to the bleeding Baobab. There, beneath its branches, they dug a shallow grave. But every time the hoe struck soil, fresh red sap gushed from the tree and filled the hole faster than they could empty it. After the third attempt, the oldest woman, Mama Dupe, raised her hand. "The ancestors do not want her hidden. They want her remembered. So they laid Omotara on a low platform of sacred Irako with directly beneath the split in the trunk. They draped her in white, scattered cowries over her body, and placed her favorite doll in her arms. Then they stepped back. Within minutes the red sap began to flow again, gentle now, like tears. It ran down the trunk, over the wood, and covered the child in a shining crimson shroud that hardened slowly into a shell no insect or rain could ever break. By sunset she looked as though she had been carved from a single piece of red glass, still smiling her small, terrible smile. The village understood. This was her true grave. From that day forward, every person who passed the hill greeted her aloud. Ikabo, Omotara. We see you. We will never forget. On the 7th day after her death, the women returned with white chalk and camwood. They wrote on the trunk in bold letters that glowed in moonlight, Igi Omotara, the tree of Omotara. Beneath it they wrote the warning that would be taught to every child born in Idonra for 1,000 years. Ima ifai owopa omo in lanu mo. Do not put your hand into your child's future and destroy it. That night lightning struck the hill, but it did not burn the tree. Instead it carved the words deeper into the bark, so deep that no knife could ever erase them. From then on, the Baobab was no longer just a Baobab. It was Omotara herself, standing watch. Madness did not take Aya Tolu the way people expected. She did not wander aimlessly forever. On the 9th day, she suddenly stopped singing in the market, sat on the ground, and began to speak with perfect clarity. She told every woman who would listen exactly what her husband had done, night after night, and how silence had helped him. She spoke without shame, without lowering her voice. Mothers who had once covered their ears now leaned close. Girls who had been taught to keep family matters inside now heard that some matters must be shouted until the roof falls. By evening, a circle of 50 women sat around her. By the next morning, it was 500. They came from neighboring villages, some walking 2 days. Ayatollah did not cry anymore. She only repeated one sentence, over and over, until it became a drumbeat in every woman's heart. If it happens to one child, it has happened to all our children. We end it together, or we all die inside. Some elders grew angry. A woman does not speak of such things in public. It brings shame on the whole village. They sent a delegation to tell her to keep quiet or leave Idonra. Ayatollah met them at the gate holding Omotara's blood-stained lace dress like a banner. She did not raise her voice. She simply asked each man, one by one, "Would you be silent if this was your daughter lying under the tree?" Not one could meet her eyes. They left with bent heads. That night the men gathered in secret and decided to chase her away. But when they reached her compound at midnight, they found every doorway and window guarded by women sitting silently, machetes across their laps. No one spoke. The men turned back without a word. On the full moon, hundreds of women climbed the hill to Iji Omotara. They came barefoot, carrying babies on their backs and little girls by the hand. Ayatollah stood beneath the red glass coffin of her daughter and made them swear an oath that still echoes in Idonra today. Each woman cut her left palm with a new razor blade and pressed the bleeding hand against the trunk while repeating, "By the blood of Omotara, if any man touches a child in this land, we will drag him here ourselves. We will not wait for elders. We will not wait for police. We will not wait for gods. The tree will drink again." The sap flowed warm over their wounds like a blessing. From that night, no girl in Idonra or the 7 surrounding villages was ever again abused in secret. The women kept the oath. By the 14th day, the hunter no longer looked human. His skin had blistered and peeled where the sap touched it. New skin grew back red and raw. His beard fell out in clumps. His voice was only a croak. He no longer begged for death. He begged for Omotara to stop visiting him. Every night she came, small and glowing, standing just out of reach. She never spoke, only looked at him with those wide, forgiving eyes that hurt worse than hate. Sometimes she held out her hand, palm up, showing him the tiny scar he had given her when she was 7 and he taught her to shoot a bow. Then she turned and walked into the tree, and the trunk swallowed her. He tried to follow once. He strained against the ropes until they cut to the bone, screaming her name. The tree answered by tightening its bark around him like a living thing. He never tried again. The children of Idonra made up a skipping song that spread faster than Harmattan fire. Omotara elo kunrinmi. Ofe ibi baba tolu. Iji ugba a. Iji muon. Omotara has a man. He wants to act like Babatolu. The tree will take him. The blood will drink him. Whenever a strange man lingered too long near a girl, the children began to sing it. The man would feel suddenly cold and leave quickly. Mothers smiled behind their wrappers. The song was protection wrapped in play. With her own hands, Ayatolu began to build a small mud house at the foot of Iji Omotara. People brought blocks, zinc, food. Within 1 moon, it stood complete, a refuge for any girl who needed to run. She painted the door bright red and wrote above it, Ayali Omotara, Omotara's house. Inside she kept 7 mats, 7 lanterns, and 7 machetes. She herself slept there every night, guarding the hill, guarding the tree, guarding every daughter who might one day need sanctuary. Girls began to arrive, some carried by mothers, some coming alone in the dark, whispering at the gate, "Auntie, it has started in my house too." Ayatolu never asked questions. She simply opened the door and said, "You are safe now. The tree is watching." 1 year to the day after Omotara's death, a mighty storm rose. Thunder rolled like the drums of war. The people locked their doors in fear. But at Iji Omotara the wind carried voices, hundreds of women's voices, old and young, singing the oath song in perfect harmony. Every woman who had ever sworn beneath the tree woke at the same moment and felt her left palm burn where the scar still remained. They came out of their houses and looked toward the hill. There, above the red coffin, a small light danced, Omotara's spirit, bright as moonlight on water. She raised one hand in greeting, then faded into the trunk. The storm passed without breaking a single leaf. In the morning, the village found fresh white cowries scattered all over the ground beneath the tree, hundreds of them, though no human hand had placed them there. The people gathered them in silence and knew the ancestors had accepted the oath. The protection would last forever. If you really find it interesting, please subscribe, share, like for more videos. If you really find it interesting, please subscribe, share, like for more videos.